Our midweek devotion is the parable of the lost sheep. To understand this parable more fully, we need to see an aerial view of chapter 18. At the start of this chapter, Jesus admonishes the disciples who want to know who among them is the greatest. And this is the frame that we need to see everything today. Watch what Jesus says in verse 3. Truly I tell you, whoever becomes humble like a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes him welcomes me. Then Jesus goes on, if any of you put a stumbling block in front of them, as in little children, then their sin is yours. And then he opens our parable today in verse 10. Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, in heaven their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. Do you see what Jesus is doing here in Matthew 18? He responds 3 times to the disciples' question of who is the greatest, each time telling them the same thing in 3 different ways. And Jesus is saying, those who have eyes to see like children, those who pay attention to the lowly and the downtrodden, those who make room for seemingly insignificant people, those are the greatest in the kingdom, for they know how and where to find God. And we can be great like them if we too understand we have an obligation to protect and support those in need, to love them. And this is so important, and albeit challenging though. Our faith is connected to others. Their life is intertwined with ours. It reminds me of one of America's best slogans, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It's not the official motto of USA, but it does have a place in our history. It's used to explain how the 13 colonies came together to form the United States. It's a constant reminder that we're united under a much larger banner. We may have different beliefs, different religions, different skin tones, sexualities, cultures, food choices, learning styles, and desires, but out of our many, we are one. Out of our many, we are united. Out of our many, there are something bigger that connects our souls to one another. This is E pluribus unum. And America isn't the only culture that shares this thought. A few years ago, dear friends of ours went to India for a mission immersion experience. When they arrived, they lived with Baptist missionaries and began learning Indian culture as fast as they could. One of the first things they learned is how to greet one another. Namaste. You're probably familiar with this word. This word wasn't new to my friends either, but the Indian understanding of it was. They were told by a local priest that in Indian culture, the concept of God's presence radiates through even casual conversations. For in Indian culture, Namaste means the divinity in me bows to the divinity in you. When I greet you, I not only recognize your humanity, but I see the image of the divine in you as well. It's India's way of saying we may have different beliefs, different religions, different skin tones, sexualities, cultures, food choices, learning styles, and desires, but out of our many, we are still one. Out of our many, we are united. Out of all of our differences, there is something bigger that connects our souls to one another. This is Namaste and E pluribus unum. In South African culture, you'll hear the word Ubuntu. It means humanity. It's often translated as humanity towards others. Desmond Tutu popularized this thought in a more philosophical sense to mean the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects all humanity. In other words, it's South Africa's way of saying we have many different beliefs, different religions or skin tones, sexualities, cultures, food choices, learning styles, and desires. But out of our many, we are one. Out of our many, we are united. There is something bigger that connects our souls to one another. This is Ubuntu and Namaste and E pluribus unum. I think it's so fascinating. Here are 3 distinct cultures with different leaders, different histories, all overcoming significant cultural adaptations like wars, human rights, freedom, democracy, each of their own unique history, each working out their own identity philosophically, and each arriving at a similar conclusion. We're in this together. It's as if even a larger connection, helping cultures and countries evolve into an even greater awareness of self. Perhaps what we're seeing is the handiwork of God's Spirit dwell in people, guiding us all to love one another better, to rise in consciousness and realize we are in this together. I know that's what Jesus is saying in his parable in Matthew 18. Hear this story again in verse 12. If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So is it not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost? I hear Jesus saying, we have an obligation to those around us. Their faith is connected to ours. Their life is intertwined with ours. Namaste, Ubuntu, E pluribus unum. We are all in this together. We are connected by God's Spirit. God's Spirit is that higher presence, helping cultures and countries evolve into a more greater awareness of self, a rise in consciousness. We may have different beliefs, different religions, different skin tones, sexualities, cultures, food choices, learning styles, and desires. But out of our many, we're still one. Out of our many, we're still united. Out of our many, there's something bigger that connects our souls to one another. It's the Holy Spirit. It's God's handiwork dwelling in people, guiding us all to love one another better, to see one another better, to know we're all intricately connected to share in love and hope and in joy with one another. And Jesus in Matthew 18 agrees. That's why our concern, our faith, our love for one another must be built in a way that we notice the one lost sheep and then we go find her because we're connected to her. That sheep helps define what's truly great in us and in them because we are in this together. And what happens to you affects me. And what happens to the least of these affects us all. What happens to the lowly, the downtrodden, the children, the women, the disenfranchised, the forgotten, the senior adults, the disabled, the depressed, the mentally ill, black people, white people, the widowed, the rejected. What happens to them happens to Jesus and to you and to me because we are all in this together.